The night. Everything changed. At 11:40 on the night of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic was moving through the dark North Atlantic. More than 2,200 people were aboard. Some were sleeping. Some were talking with friends. Others were enjoying what they believed would be another ordinary night aboard the most famous ship in the world. Then, somewhere ahead in the darkness, the lookouts saw something. An iceberg. The warning came. The ship turned. But it was already too late. The Titanic struck the iceberg. At first, many passengers didn't even realize what had happened. Some felt a strange vibration. Others heard a grinding sound. But within minutes, engineers and officers began to understand the truth. The Titanic was taking on water, and the ship that many believed was practically impossible to sink had only a few hours left. This is the true story of the Titanic's final night. The ship that was supposed to be different. On April 10, 1912, the RMS Titanic left Southampton, England, beginning her maiden voyage toward New York. She was enormous for her time. The ship represented the height of early 20th century engineering, luxury, and confidence. First-class passengers enjoyed elegant dining rooms and luxurious accommodations. Second-class passengers experienced comfort that was impressive by the standards of the time. And in third class, families and immigrants were crossing the Atlantic, hoping for a new life in America. For everyone aboard, the journey represented something different. For some, it was business. For others, it was adventure. And for many immigrants, it was the beginning of a completely new life. Nobody knew that they were sailing into history. As Titanic crossed the North Atlantic, the ship received warnings about sea ice. The danger was not completely unknown. Other vessels were reporting ice in the region. Some of those reports reached Titanic's wireless operators. The later investigations examined the warnings, the ship's speed, its course, and how the information was handled. But Titanic continued through the night. The sea was unusually calm, and that calm would become important. A rough ocean can make ice easier to spot because waves break against it. But on a very calm night, the surface can appear almost like black glass. Ahead of the Titanic was an iceberg, and the lookouts had only moments to react. At approximately 11:40 p.m., they spotted it. An alarm was raised. The ship began turning, but the iceberg struck the starboard side. The collision opened several compartments to the sea. Titanic had been designed to remain afloat with a limited number of forward compartments flooded, but too many compartments were damaged. Water began moving from one compartment toward another. The ship's fate was becoming unavoidable. This is where the story becomes frightening. Imagine being inside the Titanic. You are in your cabin. Perhaps you're asleep. Suddenly something feels different. You hear movement in the corridors. Crew members begin rushing through the ship, but nobody initially knows exactly what is happening. Then the order comes. Prepare the lifeboats. Many passengers didn't immediately understand how serious the situation was. Why would they? The Titanic was one of the largest ships ever built. It was supposed to be incredibly safe. But there was a terrible problem. There were not enough lifeboat spaces for everyone aboard. Titanic carried more lifeboat capacity than required by the regulations of the time, but that capacity was still far below the number of people aboard. And now, those lifeboats were being prepared. Women and children were being told to leave the ship. But many passengers hesitated. Some lifeboats were launched without being completely filled. The crew was dealing with a situation nobody had rehearsed at this scale, and every minute mattered. Inside Titanic's wireless room, the operators began sending distress messages. The ship was sinking. Help was needed immediately. The wireless operator transmitted the distress signal. Ships in the region heard the calls, but most were too far away. One ship, however, began racing toward Titanic. It was the RMS Carpathia. The Carpathia was roughly 58 miles away when it received Titanic's call for assistance and immediately turned toward the disaster. But there was a terrible problem. Titanic was sinking much faster than the rescue ship could arrive. Every minute that passed brought the Carpathia closer, but it also brought Titanic closer to the bottom of the Atlantic. By the early morning hours of April 15th, the situation had become desperate. The bow was sinking deeper. The stern was rising. Passengers gathered on the upper decks. Lifeboats were disappearing into the darkness. Some people said goodbye to their families. Others prayed. Some stood quietly, unable to believe what was happening. And somewhere below them, thousands of tons of seawater continued flooding the ship. The Titanic's enormous size could not save it. Its luxurious interiors could not save it. Its powerful engines could not save it. And eventually, the ship began to break apart. At approximately 2:20 a.m., Titanic disappeared beneath the surface. More than 1,500 people died. Only hundreds survived. The ocean became the final resting place of people who had expected to wake up in New York. Instead, they became part of one of the most famous disasters in history. But the story didn't end when Titanic disappeared. For the survivors, another terrifying chapter had begun. Hundreds of people were now sitting in lifeboats in the freezing Atlantic darkness. They had escaped the sinking ship, but they didn't know when help would arrive. Some survivors could see the lights of the Titanic disappearing into the distance. Then those lights vanished, and the people in the lifeboats were left surrounded by darkness. Eventually, they saw something approaching. The Carpathia had arrived. The ship began rescuing survivors from the lifeboats. By morning, hundreds of people had been brought aboard. The National Archives records the Carpathia's manifest as containing 706 people rescued from Titanic's lifeboats. For those survivors, the nightmare was finally ending. But for thousands of families around the world, the waiting was just beginning. The sinking shocked the world. Investigations began in both the United States and Britain. Officials examined the ship's design, speed, wireless communications, ice warnings, lifeboats, evacuation procedures, and crew training. The disaster eventually led to major changes in maritime safety. New rules increased requirements for lifeboats and life-saving equipment. And in 1914, the International Ice Patrol was established to monitor icebergs in the North Atlantic. The Titanic disaster also contributed to broader international maritime safety standards that eventually became associated with the Solis Convention. In other words, Titanic changed the way ships were expected to protect human life. More than a century later, we still remember the Titanic. We remember the iceberg. We remember the photographs. We remember the lifeboats. We remember the musicians. We remember the families who never made it home. But perhaps the most important part of the Titanic story isn't the ship itself. It's the people. More than 2,200 people boarded that ship with different dreams. Some were traveling for business. Some were returning home. Some were immigrants hoping to begin a new life in America. And on one cold night in the North Atlantic, all of their stories changed. The Titanic was built as a symbol of human achievement, but its sinking became a reminder of human limits. Because technology can make a ship enormous. It can make it luxurious. It can make it powerful. But no ship can control the ocean. And no human being can control nature. At 2:20 in the morning on April 15th, 1912, the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic. But its story never did. And perhaps that is the real reason we still talk about it today. The Titanic didn't just sink. It changed history.